Hey, you guys of DRC Guiglo over there in Côte d'Ivoire, this one's for you. Here are 5 stupid things I've noticed about the United Nations. The permanent members of the Security Council. In the UN General Assembly, it's pretty straightforward, one state, one vote. But on the Security Council, which is arguably the most powerful organ of the UN because it has the authority to authorize military action, things are a little different. It's still one state, one vote, but there are only 15 members of the Security Council, and 5 of those members are always the same. Those 5 countries, those permanent members, are the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Russia, and China. They represent the winning powers of World War II. They also have the largest militaries in the world, and under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, they are the only countries officially authorized to possess nuclear weapons. In other words, the task of maintaining world peace is entrusted to the guys who own and sell the most guns. And maybe that makes sense to you. Maybe you think, well, how else could you enforce world peace unless you had the firepower to back up your authority? And, you know, that sounds like a good point. But unfortunately, it also brings me to the next stupid thing about the United Nations. It's not so great at stopping wars. Since the United Nations was founded in 1945, there have been between 150 and 200 or so wars, and that specific number depends on how you define war, and thousands of armed conflicts. Now, pointing out that the United Nations failed to prevent those conflicts is very different from saying that the United Nations is responsible for those conflicts, and I'm definitely not saying that. But if you study the data gathered by studies like the University of Michigan's ongoing Correlates of War project, for instance, you can't help but notice that the world isn't really all that much more peaceful today than it was prior to the existence of the UN. Maybe that's because it's easy to ignore. If you're a real troublemaker, the UN Security Council might issue a resolution ordering you to, say, stop violating the borders of your neighbors, or stop mass murdering your own people. And that's when it gets serious, because, buddy, if you dare to defy a UN Security Council resolution, probably nothing will happen. I mean, the UN Charter does give the Security Council the authority to enforce its resolutions, but then it's got to call up peacekeepers from the militaries of member nations. It's got to define the parameters of the intervention. It's got to transport the peacekeepers to the troubled area. Oh, God, can we just forget about it? I'm getting tired just talking about this. And anyway, enforcing a UN resolution through military intervention is a lot harder than even I'm making it sound, what with the Great Power Unanimity rule. Yeah, so back to those 5 permanent members of the Security Council. They all have to agree on a particular course of action for anything to happen. Each of those 5 permanent members holds veto power over the Council's actions, which means that if one of them says no, essentially the whole Council says no. And again, those 5 members are the military powerhouses of the world. Wouldn't it make more sense to give the veto power to countries that have histories of being peaceful and level-headed? Like, I don't know, Canada or Switzerland? I mean, look, we trust the Swiss to make our watches, to make our chocolate, our army knives. Why not trust them with world peace? Much of the real good it does goes unnoticed. It's never been cool to like the UN, at least not here in the United States. Despite the fact that we're a founding member, despite the fact that its headquarters is in New York City, it's always been way more acceptable to bitch about its cost or its ineffectiveness than to sing its praises. And yet, despite everything I've said in this video, the UN is responsible for a lot of good that is done in the world today. Other than the General Assembly and the Security Council, it's also responsible for organizations like the International Criminal Court, the World Health Organization, the World Food Program, the United Nations Children's Fund, or UNICEF. And then there are people like the guys I shouted out at the start of this video who are providing aid and relief to refugees and victims of conflicts and natural disasters all over the world. Those people and others like them are allowing the UN to work to really and truly make this world a better place. Unfortunately, they're not able to do very much towards making it a more peaceful place. And that's too bad, because that was sort of the point. The hardest part is only picking 5. Catch you next time.